Welcome to another episode of the Common Questions podcast series. My name is Jonathan Ciecka, and I'm joined here today once again by Mr. Josh Brooker. Thanks. Wow. Josh, thanks for coming on. We're having a good time. We're off to a strong start.
Yeah, I took your breath away, apparently. You have no words. So.
Just absolutely gone. You've got the rest of the interview now.
I guess so. How are you, man?
I'm doing good. So, Josh, we found out a little bit more about you in the Authentic Discipleship podcast series. So just to get us started, I want to ask, what has been working in vocational ministry been like for you? How long you've been doing it for? And how would you say that's shaping you as a Christ follower personally to be the campus pastor of our Canon County campus?
Yeah. I've been doing this full-time since 2013, so about 12 years. And I had about 3 years before that doing it bivocationally. So, after you've got kind of a decade of doing it, it definitely has had some amazing seasons and beautiful seasons and difficult seasons as well. But by and large, I think it's been an amazing journey of discovering my own inadequacy apart from the strength that Christ provides for me. And it's been amazing just to see the kind of people God surrounded me with. And so if I could say anything to myself 12 years ago, 13 years ago, I would say, you're not going to do this alone. God's going to put people around you to support you, lift you up, walk with you through it. So, I feel like I know a lot less about full-time vocational ministry now than I did 12 years ago, because every year that goes on, I find out just how little I know. Mm-hmm. And when I assume to know something, all it takes is one challenging situation to expose to me that I actually know far less than I thought I did. So, I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think there's an old Mark Twain quote about that of the thing that gets you in trouble isn't what you don't know, it's what you know for sure that just ain't so.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a way of, I think, growth where you get to a certain point where you realize that there is so much in this world that I will never know. But 12, 13 years ago, I just didn't know what I didn't know, mm-hmm. if that makes sense. So, yeah, man, it's been an amazing journey. I'm super, super blessed to have gone through it and for God to call me in it. It's an honor to be able to do what I do. There's certain days where I think, man, I can't believe that I get paid to do what I'm doing just because it's so beautiful and amazing. And there's other days that are exceptionally challenging, and I can't believe that this is what I do. But, yeah, mm-hmm. I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. It's been the most amazing journey.
Awesome. Very cool. So the topic that we're talking about today, we're talking about the biblical canon. We're talking about what's in the Bible, what's not in the Bible, and why there's two different categories for that. And it's a good thing that to start off the top of the episode with just defining terms. So when we talk about canon, obviously we're talking about the Protestant canon, right, and its known English order and that kind of stuff.
Sure.
I'm going to be embarrassed if I don't get these numbers right off the top of my head. 27 books of the Old Testament, 39 of the New? Other way around?
Other way around, yep. 66 books total, 39 old, 27 new. Yeah.
Hi, I'm a pastor at the Experience Community Church.
Well, now that you said it, man, I'm thinking, gosh, maybe I got it wrong and you got it right. So I don't know. We'll see.
66 total. We know that.
There's a 66 total. Yes, there is an Old Testament. There is a New Testament. Yeah.
Good.
We do know that part.
We've established the facts.
Yes.
So, and part of the reason we're doing this conversation is because I don't know about you. I've gotten a number of questions over the years. People asking, "Hey, we have these 66 books in our Bible. I've got these Roman Catholic friends or family mm-hmm. who have more books in their Bible, and I have these Eastern Orthodox friends who have even more books in their Bible. Like, sure. Why are our Bibles different? If someone was just asking you, why do we have a different Bible than them, how would you respond?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I think also it's relevant because there are a lot of folks that will come to me sometimes and ask, hey, what about this hidden gospel that was just, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Judas, the Gospel of Mary, all these different other writings. And they seem to be saying something different than the four Gospels that are in the New Testament. So, is it this great conspiracy that there's all these men within the Vatican that are trying to keep the truth of who Jesus is? I mean, Jesus was this esoteric New Age teacher, but that is something we've had to keep silenced. And so it turns into basically a Dan Brown novel, Da Vinci Code, that kind of thing. And I think actually when you start digging into it and seeing why there is a canon and why certain books made the cut and certain books did not make the cut, it's far less fantastical than I think some people might imagine. So, yeah, I mean, I guess we could just start with the books in the Old Testament and why those books were accepted. Generally speaking, those books were accepted because this is what Judaism, or the practice of the Jewish faith in kind of that Second Temple intertestamental period, accepted as this is our scripture. Now, there were other books present, what we know of as the apocryphal books, and those would not have been considered bad books. They just weren't seen on the same level as Scripture in terms of the same authority, in terms of perhaps even guides for doctrine or the practice of the Jewish religion. And so those would have been seen as important, and they would have been seen as something that was worth reading, but not necessarily on the same level as Scripture. So that would explain kind of the Old Testament first, and then why certain apocryphal books were there, but not seen necessarily as Scripture. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of those deuterocanonical or apocryphal books, whatever you want to call them, even some of them self-admit in the book. I mean, Sirach or Tobit, one of those two, openly say, hey, this is a commentary.
Right.
These are some thoughts. We're not saying that it's on the same level as the prophets. We're just saying some things over here.
Yeah, and most of, not most of them, but a few of them would be considered pseudegraphia. Mm-hmm. So have you defined that for your listeners? Is there another episode? Or
Let's do so now.
Let's do so now. Okay, so pseudegraphia would be, it was understood and known that it was not, the author that it was credited to was not the one that wrote it. Is
Things
that a good
like First
definition?
Enoch.
Yeah. So Enoch, obviously, if you know the Old Testament, the book of Genesis, Enoch would have been in kind of the lineage of Noah. Mm-hmm. But the writings that were credited to him in the books of Enoch, that is in the Apocrypha, those would have happened around kind of that Second Temple intertestamental period. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of understood that Enoch maybe didn't write this. These are kind of, for lack of a better term, I don't want to say folklore, fairy tale, or mythology, because it was oral tradition passed on that eventually around that time it was put to paper. This is the, kind of oral tradition of what happened to Enoch. Mm-hmm. And so it was understood Enoch didn't really write it, but this is the book of Enoch, right? So that would be called pseudegraphia. So around that time when the canon for the Old Testament was being established, or just at least being accepted as Scripture, it would have kind of seen that and just said, okay, that wouldn't belong on the same level as Scripture. History, sure. Important to the Jewish people, sure. Not history, or not Scripture, rather.
Yeah. And while we're still on the topic of the Old Testament, sometimes people will get really bent out of shape about the order of the Old Testament books and say, look, in this Protestant Bible order, we've got from Genesis through Chronicles, but I'm learning about this whole Tanakh thing where it's like, no, these three other divisions where it's not the major, minor prophets, history, writings, and all these kind of stuff, but we've got the Torah, the prophets, the writings, and people, I think, get bent out of shape about. I've got my own thoughts about it. Have you come across that? What's your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'd probably be the one to ask about the reasons given for why certain order was in the Old Testament. I don't think I know enough to really speak to that intelligently. I do know when I preached through the book of 1 Samuel that in the Jewish writings, 1 and 2 Samuel were originally one book. And so you've got things like that where kind of the divisions were created more for simplicity of access and practical reasons, not necessarily theological reasons or, in number of importance. And I think it's kind of the same with the minor and major prophets, that kind of the minor prophets are the ones that are smaller and the major ones are the ones that are longer. Mm-hmm. So it's not, hey, this is first because this is the most important. It's more practical and accessible reasons. Is that your understanding of it as well?
Yeah, and I think what I've come across in people getting bent out of shape about the order of the books is that, if you look at the Hebrew order of it, then it makes this more narrative flow and like all these things come together to where you've got the narrative and then a commentary on the narrative and then resuming the narrative. But I think in practice, certainly most Christians, and I think most people who get really on this high horse about it, they're not reading such large chunks of the Old Testament themselves that the transitions between the books really make that big of a difference.
Sure.
Like, I can't think of great examples right off the top of my head, but I think that it's one of those things that, like, as a trivia thing, people really like to show off that they know. In function, and this is from one of my New Testament professors, who knows the stuff inside and out, said it really doesn't make a difference as far as how we interpret these books.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would think that if you've read it all, from the Genesis to Revelation, you should be able to put together, the grand narrative, not sitting here and going, well, this doesn't make sense because, this, where's Job's the oldest book, so why is that in the wisdom literature, not, before Genesis and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I really think it doesn't matter as much other than just like you said, maybe a trivia question. People like to flex that they know certain things about it, but in the end of the day, I don't know if it matters too much.
Mm-hmm.
Hey there. If you are looking for a daily devotional or more resources to explore on your own to help you grow in your faith, we have an archive of past 40-day fasts that are available to you. On our app, we have each day listed with the script and devotional, or you can listen to these anywhere you find your podcasts.
So if you got anything else on the Old Testament there? Are you ready to start looking at the New Testament?
We can start looking at the New Testament. New Testament, as far as we know, was finalized as authoritative and it's as far as the canon in the year 367 by the church father Athanasius. And so this was like a process. What didn't happen just by one guy in that year. It started, as far as we know, in the 90s, not the 1990s, the 90s. Well, everybody was listening to New Kids on the Block and wearing their wind pants. That's when it started. Mm-hmm. No, just kidding. It started in the 90s and continued for a period of about 300 years, where people within the church were going back and forth with certain writings and trying to figure out, okay, here's the writings we have that were very influential in creating the Christian movement. And these are the ones we followed. These are the ones we've built doctrine around. These are the ones we've accepted as authoritative. How do we kind of whittle that down to the ones that would make the 27 books that we have now called the New Testament? And so that process was finalized in 367 at a meeting called the Council of Carthage. Mm-hmm. So it was not a haphazard, secret hidden meeting of all the men in the Vatican trying to make sure that the voices of women and marginalized people were oppressed by excluding certain books, is what I'm trying to get at. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, too, it's important to note that this was an organic process that,
right.
What 367 you said, it wasn't as if before then we had no idea and, well, we're all just taking a shot in the dark, and now, okay, the order has come down from on high, these are the books.
Right.
There was a sort of universal recognition among the churches about most of them. Some of them were back and forth a little bit, but pretty much everyone knew, hey, these are the books, and maybe these ones too, but some of these other ones we can definitely rule out.
Sure.
And I'm going to mess up the example specifically, but if I remember correctly, there was, somewhere in the 2nd century in the early church, a guy wrote a book called The Acts of Paul and Thecla, and we have documentation from that church. Because sometimes people will say, like, specifically about the pseudepigrapha genre, well, it was super common at that time.
Wait, did you say pseudepigrapha or pseudographia? Which is the most intellectual way to say it?
I'm going to go with pseudepigrapha.
Really?
But,
okay. Well, that's just like my Georgia redneck way of saying it. Man, that's that pseudographia, man. So, okay. Well, if you say so, I'll go with your way of saying it. So, pseudepigrapha?
Pseudepigrapha, false writings. Just think on that for a second.
Yes.
Meditate on pseudepigrapha.
Yes, I shall.
Yes.
Anyway, sorry to interrupt you. You just sounded so smart. I just had to.
I can't help it sometimes.
And humble.
Absolutely. Always.
Okay, you're getting back to what you're saying about the Acts of Paul or the writings of Paul. Yeah.
Yeah. So this guy wrote a book, attributed it to Paul, was not Paul.
Sure.
So we have it on record that the church kicked this guy out of the church for writing that book falsely, because in his mind, he was like, well, I just love Paul so much, I wanted to write this as almost devoted to him.
Like fan fiction almost. Yeah.
Exactly. And the church said, you can't do this, you're not Paul.
Right.
So if people try to say, well, it was a super common genre, it was, and no one in the church accepted it.
Right.
So I think that's a good thing to note as well.
Yeah. I think something too to keep in mind is that the writings that were received had to come from credible sources, right? So it had to be somebody that was considered either a recognized apostle, like somebody who had been with Jesus, or someone who was like Paul or like other New Testament writers, seen as credible by the apostles, right? And so it wasn't, every single book. There's some books we don't know who the author is. That'd like be the book of Hebrews. We don't know who that is, right? But by and large, when we look at the four Gospels, the three synoptics, and then John's Gospel, those were writers that were either eyewitnesses of Jesus themselves, or they were basically held in good standings by the eyewitnesses of Jesus themselves. So there was an apostolic authority there established, specifically the writings of Paul, but also, you think of Revelation, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, John's Gospel. John was the disciple Jesus loved. And so the early church is like, okay, so the theology presented in those books, that's like great theology, and we can vouch for that because that's John. That's the apostle Jesus loved. He'd spent time with Jesus. We know him. Church history tells us that he lived to be a very old man and that he would have ministered and pastored in the city of Ephesus up until he died as an old man. So there's a lot that could be said about him establishing credibility in the early Christian church. Therefore, the writings that were credited to him were seen as authoritative because he had an established credibility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they were all written at a time that John could have actually written these words. Now, sometimes people get wondering about, like, we read in 1 Peter that Peter said that I wrote to you these things by the name of his scribe. I can't remember the name off the top of my head. But
that's a good Bible trivia. Yeah.
Yep. Let us know in the comments who you think it was before you check. No, but it was still an apostolic source of that, even if he, like Paul, wasn't necessarily the one to put pen to paper on all these things, but he was the one speaking these things to the people who actually did physically write them down.
Absolutely. Yeah, so that was like, probably the biggest two criteria is it had to be a recognized apostle, or it had to be someone who was associated with a recognized apostle. And if it wasn't, then in that 300-year period between, 95 AD, and then, when that council in 367 took place, those books would have kind of already been sorted out, really. Hey, this wasn't written by somebody credible that we know, that has a credible ministry, that has, people that vouch for their, their authority or their association with the apostles. So, yeah, we're not going to accept that book as something that's right. So that's kind of the biggest criteria. And then the next criteria was just truthfulness, right? So if anything was found in the writing that just was not true, it would have been dismissed as not from God. So, like, this is part of the reason why people that believe in the inerrancy of Scripture are so adamant about the accuracy found in Scripture. Specifically, I would say in the Synoptic Gospels. And what's so fascinating about that is there's claims that are made in the Synoptic Gospels about geographical sites in the city of Jerusalem that for years people were like, well, we've never heard of that before. And then as archaeology is advancing, these sites that were claimed in those Gospels are being discovered, which is pretty remarkable to see that, yeah, the authority of the Scripture, it can be trusted. These things are true, and they're not haphazard. They're intentionally put in there to say, this is an eyewitness account of what really happened. And so I think that's a really important criteria to keep in mind, especially when we get into like the Gnostic Gospels and others, some of the crazy, wild claims made in some of those writings. It's just simply not true. We don't have any verifiable reasons to believe it's true. So
yeah, and something else that you said that I think is another good point to bring up. So if we were talking to a Catholic brother or sister and asked them why is the canon the way that it is, their response would go something along the lines of because they have the recognized authority of the church.
Right.
But where we're talking about the church recognizing the authority of the Scriptures is that God has already inspired these words and determined them to be authoritative. We're just recognizing what God has already put in there. Because again, sometimes the Catholic line will go, well, God made a church before he made a Bible. So,
but I think what I was trying to say, I think that criteria was more in alignment with the other Scriptures as well. So the truthfulness criteria is also faithfulness to the other writings of Scripture, not just in terms of claims made, but also in terms of like doctrine and practice. Mm-hmm. So there was a whole slew of writings that came around much later that was sometimes credited to the apostles, but it wasn't the apostles, it was the Gnostics. Mm-hmm. So the Gnostics were false teachers. You could read about John's response to the Gnostics in 1 John. They believed all sorts of kind of esoteric, New Agey sort of, metaphysical claims about, the spiritual world being good, physical world being bad, all that stuff. So when they were kind of gaining popularity, they started putting out writings that were claimed to be writings of the apostles, like the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Judas, things like that. And it wasn't. Those apostles had been dead for a long time. They were just basically using their names to try to give their movement some sort of credibility and authority. Mm-hmm. But it's pretty clear when you read some of those writings that it doesn't align at all with the rest of the accounts that were given of the life, the teaching, and the ministry of Jesus. So that just doesn't really pass the sniff test at all. If you were a detective trying to figure out, is there something to this Jesus guy? You've got all these verifiable accounts that corroborate with one another. Matthew's gospel, Mark's gospel, Luke's gospel, even the writings of John. Okay, all these are saying the same thing, but they're saying it differently. They're including some different details, but they're basically saying the exact same thing. And then you've got some of these fringe ones that are saying, well, actually, Jesus said something that would have contradicted what he said in these other accounts. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, clearly these would not be considered authoritative or credible, and turns out they were written much, much later than the apostles lived. So those would not have passed that criteria to be included in the canon as well.
Right. And was there another criteria on there that we haven't talked about yet? I feel like we've talked about 3 of them, but is there a fourth one?
Yeah, I think, just truthfulness, but then also just the idea that, doctrinally it had to be, pass that test as well. Mm-hmm. So, and I think we got to keep in mind, like we said earlier, this was not a haphazard process, or they all just, okay, so what are we going to do today? All right, guys, let's get all the writings and let's look. This was a long 300-year process that was really established and finalized at the Council of Carthage, but it had been going on for a very long time before that. It was just sort of made official at that point. Mm-hmm. So I think that we can see that and understand that, man, the Bible we have in our hands is an ancient document, and it's one that has stood the test of time. Mm-hmm. And it's one that, as we continue to scrutinize it, as we continue to criticize it and try to find reasons to debunk it, there was one writer that said the Bible is like the anvil, that every hammer that tries to pound on the anvil, the hammer ends up breaking, the anvil stays the same, right? Mm-hmm. The more criticisms, the more scrutiny, the more things we say, oh, it's chock full of contradictions and errors and whatever, it stands the test of time. My favorite question when somebody says to me, well, we know the Bible's full of contradictions. I just love saying, oh, really? Where? And most of the time you find out they've actually not read it. Mm-hmm. They actually just found that on a blog somewhere or a tweet somewhere. And I would say the most helpful thing, if you're doubting the validity of Scripture or the credibility of Scripture, read it, mm-hmm. and then research, how the Bible came to us.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point to emphasize, is that sometimes we can spend so much time worrying about what's not in the Bible that we don't spend very much time considering what is in the Bible.
Absolutely.
So, if you're not in the Word, get in the Word. Now, let's say that a hypothetical church congregant is in their Word on a regular basis, and they're just curious about some of these other things. Right. Would you encourage them to look into these things, do so cautiously, use other resources? If they say, hey, I've heard about this first Enoch thing, I just want to know more about that.
Sure. Yeah, I would say you need to have a biblical foundation. You need to be familiar with the grand narrative of Scripture. You need to be familiar with the majors of Christian theology. And when you have those, and when you know those, and when you understand and know why certain books made the cut and why certain books didn't, I don't think there's anything wrong with going back and looking at those books. Mm-hmm. Because if you actually have a working understanding of the foundation of the biblical narrative, why certain books made the cut, why certain books didn't, then you going and looking at the other books, usually in about 5 minutes of you reading it, if you already kind of know how Scripture reads, you understand, I could see why this didn't make it, right? It's almost like I was given a Book of Mormon a few years ago, Have you ever read the Book of Mormon?
I have glanced at it.
Okay. So I've grown up my whole life reading the scriptures. I've been a Christian for 25 years. I was raised in a Christian home, so I've read the Bible almost every day for 25 straight years. And I usually read through the whole Bible from the beginning to the end in a given year. So I've read through the Bible every year for the past probably 15 years at least. And I say that to say that because I'm familiar with the scriptures, when I started reading the Book of Mormon, it was very obvious to me that it was fake. Just because it read just like someone who was trying to sound like it was scripture, but I knew, man, and I don't even know how I knew, other than I just was so familiar with how the scripture reads, that I was like, this just doesn't taste like it. It just doesn't seem like it, right? So if you know, like, what's your favorite kind of food?
That is an excellent question. I'm going to say pizza.
Okay, so like you have your favorite pizza, I imagine. Your favorite pizza restaurant, I imagine.
Costco.
Oh, Costco pizza. Okay, wow. Refined palate, I would say.
Absolutely.
Right? So for me, like I grew up eating Southern food. I grew up in Georgia. My grandmother had a commercial fryer in her kitchen. I know what Southern food is supposed to taste like. Don't ask me how I know, but if I taste good Southern food, I can go, that is some good Southern food. That's somebody's mama made that, right? But then if I go somewhere like a dinner show at Pigeon Forge and they're trying to pass it off as Southern food and I taste it and I go, that's fried chicken, that's fried okra, that's cornbread, but that's not authentic. That was made in some corporate kitchen somewhere and microwaved in the back, right? Now, how do I know that? Because I've eaten the real thing. So I can spot the fake. And so I think if you want to branch out and kind of read these other writings, I think you need to have enough of a palate to know what's real and know what's authentic to where you can taste something and go, yeah, that ain't real. Make sense?
Absolutely. And I think if people do, again, they're well grounded in the scriptures, they know the majors of the faith and the storyline of the true Bible, and they say, hey, I'm just curious about these things.
Sure.
Reading the books is fine. It's helpful to have a guide that goes along with it as well. Someone
Yep.
who knows a little bit about how to point out to you, hey, this is where the storyline goes off the rails a little bit. These are actually some helpful parts over here. And these are some parts that were maybe added later to it. Just not going to some website with no citations to it whatsoever and saying, oh, this is the book here, and just getting that straight text, but maybe like a good reputable edition of these.
Absolutely. I would very much recommend that you don't do it just on your own or go ask ChatGPT to tell you what it's about. So, yeah.
The bane of my existence. People
so to say, that's your favorite topic, isn't it?
That is a topic for another common question.
There you go. Yeah.
Cool. Was there anything else you want to talk about the canon today? Or
I don't think so, other than I just think it is really helpful for us to understand how the Bible came to us. And I think the more we realize and understand the process that it went through and how God guided it, God kept his hand on it, I think we should have a lot of confidence that what we're reading lines up with those original writings of the apostles. And we have ancient manuscripts to verify it as well. So I think we should take great faith in that.
Absolutely. You ready for our rapid fire lightning round?
Oh, sheesh, I guess. Let's do it.
We're going to see how this
He's got
goes.
his little notebook. Oh, man. All right.
Josh, you a morning person or a night person?
I'm definitely a morning person.
Books or movies?
Books, for sure.
Fiction or nonfiction?
Depends on the mood. I'd say 50-50.
Favorite nonfiction book?
Favorite nonfiction book? Oh, my goodness. That's like asking me my favorite kid.
So you're saying you have a clear answer. It's going to take you a while to get there?
Is it have to be like a Christian book, or is it going to be anything?
Anything.
Do you want me to give him a Christian answer, or do you want me to give me a non-Christian answer?
You can pray for wisdom and discernment and apply that to this situation.
Okay, so spiritual answer, I would say, is probably Don't Waste Your Life by John Piper. Very formative book for me as a young man. Nonfiction would probably be the writings of Stephen Ambrose. So Citizen Soldiers, D-Day, either one of those two. Yeah.
Last concert that you went to?
Last concert I went to. Oh, man. So I don't get to go to a lot of concerts because I have young kids. Man, that would have to be the band Poison and Cheap Trick. And I went with a certain man named Corey Trimble. I don't know if you've heard of him or not. So
I don't think so.
You don't think so? Yeah, it was me, Corey Trimble, and our buddy Zach Sims and Devin Sweat. All went and saw Poison and Cheap Trick.
Very cool. And final question, the burning question, the thing that the people want to know.
Oh, man. Okay.
How many holes does a straw have?
How many holes does a straw have? Like a drinking straw?
Mm-hmm.
2?
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Common Questions podcast series. Be sure to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload, and we'll see you next time.
Is that a trick question?